Hi again, Science 30. So we're going to do next video here on genetic engineering. And so genetic engineering is essentially that. It's modifying the genes that are inside of an organism. And sometimes you have to modify the genes in a lab and then find a way to get those genes into the organism you're trying to modify. For example, this little mouse here, it's got a human ear growing on the back of it. We had to modify the human ear genes and then find a way to get those genes into the mouse's nucleus of its cells so that it could code and make that human ear. And so genetic engineering is exactly that. It's the modification of genetic material where scientists isolate genes from one organism and then insert them into the DNA of another organism using a virus. A virus is basically just being used as a vector or a transport molecule. So it's not actually a virus that's going to harm anything. It's just a molecule that does a really good job of getting into the genes or the genetic information of an organism and modifying it. So what better vector or device, if you will, to use to get our modified genes into different organisms than viruses. Don't stress too much about the process of using a virus, but just know that we have to get the modified genes into a new organism somehow, and we do that using usually a virus. So genetic engineering is just a modification of traditional selective breeding. So if you've ever had a dog and you said, well, I want a dog that's hypoallergenic, it's got pointy ears and a short tail. Well, that's selective breeding. It's basically genetic modification, except instead of going into a lab and doing it by hand, genetically, you have selectively breeded certain individuals over many generations to have the traits that you want. And so examples are carrots used to be white, but we've selectively bred them to be orange. Potatoes were originally poisonous. Grapefruits and oranges are all clones of one original mutant. And so we've done this all the time. If you are bored and you have 2 seconds and you want to cringe, Jimmy Kimmel on YouTube has a good video. Just type in "What are GMOs" by Jimmy Kimmel, and there's a good little skit here on watching people not understand what a GMO is, and yet they're adamantly against them. GMO just stands for genetically modified organism, and all that means is that we've changed things to grow better in harsher environments, or we've modified them so that they don't get attacked by pests in a crop field, or they are able to grow quicker and have a greater yield and be more hardy in drought seasons or in rainy seasons. And so in a time when we have major population increases and food shortages, genetically modifying our foods and our crops is very important to the survival of our species. So, I mean, genetic modifying can have some funny outcomes, right? And sometimes it's just for research, sometimes it's necessary, but there are definitely ethical concerns, obviously, in genetic engineering, and that's something important to consider. But we're not going to debate the ethics necessarily as much as we want to just understand how and what it is. So we want to genetically modify things in crops, right? So make things more nutritious, make things hardier, make them resistant to pests, have a longer shelf life, more intense flavor. And so maybe we want to increase milk production or have cattle that are larger and able to produce more milk or more beef per cow. Maybe we can have fish or salmon that are larger and grow faster and are less prone to disease. Maybe we want hormones that we can create artificially, if you will, genetically through different medicines, through bacteria and genetic modification rather than try to get it from humans. So insulin, for example, is a great example of something that's supposed to be produced by the human body, but if you're diabetic, you don't make enough insulin, and so we have produced insulin through the use of bacteria, and then collected that insulin after, and then we can administer it as an insulin drug that diabetics can use. We can get human organs for transplants from other animals by growing them in other animals, much like that human ear you saw on the mouse earlier. So transgenics is the term used to describe how we take a modified organism, a modified gene, and insert it into a vector or a virus of some sort, and then put that virus into a organism that we want to have show that modified trait. So I won't stress about this too much, but just know that transgenics is the idea that we have to use a virus or a vector of some sort to get our modified gene into a new organism so that new organism can make that gene. For example, take human ear genes and somehow get them into the mouse so the mouse can make that human ear as is. And that happens through transgenics. Gene therapy is important, so used to treat and possibly cure genetic diseases. So like hemophilia, for example, or cystic fibrosis could be cured or at least treated through genetic engineering. So it's a huge area of research in medicine. And again, we'll bring up that transgenic idea. So a vector, such as a virus, is used to insert a functional copy of a gene into a patient that has a defective gene. And the result is that the patient can now produce the missing or defective protein. But obviously there are ethical considerations. So what I want to close by saying is that there's a lot of misconceptions for sure about genetic modification, but at the same time, there's a lot of perhaps founded worry. I mean, do we know the long-term effects of genetic modification generations from now? No, we don't. We can predict that there aren't any, but we don't know that for sure. And so it's important to stay informed about the different types of genetic modification, and some modification is definitely more ethical perhaps than others, but ethics is a question that you also have to consider, right? Like, are you considering ethics in terms of health, social ethics? Are you considering economical ethics? And so different perspectives in the ethical discussion might say different things. And so I just want you to be aware that the ethical considerations around genetic modified anything is a complicated discussion. But for Science 30, I want you to recognize that there is contention, obviously, in the ethical realm for genetic modification. But I also want you to understand what genetic modification is and that we use it all the time. Like, it's all, in all likelihood, majority of what's in your fridge right now has been genetically modified in some way over human existence. Okay, guys, I'll end the video there. Thank you very much.